Hello, welcome back after a long time away from the videos, but I wanted to try and move ahead with these and catch up a little bit. So tonight we're going to talk about page 5 of the notes, and this would be lesson 3, talking about the election of 1852 and the Gadsden Purchase and the administration of President Franklin Pierce. First, we want to talk about the election of 1852, how Franklin Pierce actually becomes president. Now, the two major parties at the time were the Democrats and the Whig Party. The Whigs were very divided at this time. Of the two parties, they are the weakest because the Whig Party was essentially a party that at this point really didn't know what it wanted to do about slavery. Southern members of the Whig Party wanted to make sure that slavery went untouched. Northern members of the Whig Party were either abolitionists or they were free soilers, which meant that they didn't want to see slavery expand into the territories. So the Democrats nominate Franklin Pierce, who is a congressman from New Hampshire. He was essentially, as your notes say, a pro-Southern Northerner, which means that he was in favor of Southern issues. He wanted to allow slavery to continue. He wanted to allow the South to stay with the Union, which meant allowing slavery. And so he was a Democrat from the stronger party. Plus, he was from the North, which meant that Northerners felt comfortable voting for him, but Southerners also could feel comfortable voting for him because they didn't see him as a threat to their cause. His campaign was about how good the Compromise of 1850 was for both the North and the South, and many Southerners saw at the time that the Compromise of 1850 was actually good for their cause because it allowed for popular sovereignty in the territories, and they also got their stronger Fugitive Slave Act. It would only be until later that historians would look back and say that the Compromise of 1850 was actually very much pro-North. Up against him, the Whigs nominated General Winfield Scott. Now, the Whigs were already the party in power. They already had a sitting president, Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore was the president who had taken over when President Taylor had died of cholera earlier in that term. So they have a sitting president, and yet they do not nominate Millard Fillmore to run again for the Whig Party. This is one of the very rare times that a sitting president will not be nominated to run for a second term by his own party. Instead, the Whigs nominate General Winfield Scott, who had been a hero of the Mexican-American War. They felt that the Northern Whigs, the people from the Whig Party who were from the North, felt that the Compromise of 1850 was a bad thing because it had that fugitive slave law provision in it, and also because it didn't go far enough to ending slavery, especially when you're looking at the popular sovereignty aspect of it. And the Southern Whigs were in favor of the Compromise of 1850. And so if they wanted to vote for somebody, they were probably going to vote for the Democrats in this election. And so as you can see by the numbers, Franklin Pierce actually wins 254 electoral college votes to Winfield Scott's 42. In fact, Winfield Scott only won 4 states: Kentucky, Tennessee, Vermont, and Massachusetts. With the Whig Party being split along the lines of North and South in favor of slavery, against slavery, this is the end of the Whig Party. Within 2 years, by 1854, the Whig Party will officially go away. Why do we remember the Whig Party at this point? Well, we remember the Whig Party because 2 major congressmen, Daniel Webster and Henry Clay, who had served in Congress for more than 40 years at this point, were both members of the Whig Party. And it was because of them that we kept the idea of union alive. Now, the presidency of Franklin Pierce is not a very exciting presidency. The United States was looking to continue its expansion. We had gained everything all the way across the continent, and some people wanted us to go further. What we actually end up doing is we actually end up opening up trade with Japan. Japan was a very isolated country. They never allowed foreigners in, not at all. If they found a foreigner in their territory, they would put him on a boat, ship him out. If they found him a second time, the punishment was usually death for that. And so the United States sends its warships into Japan to force them to trade with the United States. And this fleet is led by Commodore Matthew Perry, who was Oliver Hazard Perry's little brother. Oliver Hazard Perry was the hero of the Battle of Lake Erie during the War of 1812. And so Matthew Perry is known for opening up trade with Japan, which was very isolationist at the time, which means they wanted to remain separate from everybody else. Also, the South is looking to add new states, and so they try and offer Cuba $100 million. Spain refuses to sell Cuba to the United States, and so the United States begins to plan how can they actually take control of Cuba. A U.S. trade ship called the Black Warrior was stopped in Cuba, and they didn't have the proper paperwork, and so the Spanish officials captured the ship, wouldn't let them leave, which was their right to do, but some of the Southerners say that we should actually declare war on Spain and take over Cuba in the process. We also have the Ostend Manifesto, which was a secret document circulated within the government that said that the United States would offer one more time $120 million to Spain in order to buy Cuba, and if Spain refused again, then the United States would declare war on Spain in order to take it by force. The Northerners were outraged when they found out about this. They absolutely hated this idea. They didn't want to send their young men down to Cuba in order to be killed just to add more territory to the South. And so the Ostend Manifesto goes away, and any plans for purchasing or taking Cuba by force also go away. But the Northerners were very angry that this idea was even talked about, and especially talked about secretly. The third thing that we want to talk about in this unit is also the Gadsden Purchase. Now, we've talked about how Stephen Douglas wanted to have a railroad go all the way across the United States, and now that California is a state, it becomes even more important. We want to have a quicker and easier way in order to move supplies, move money, move people back and forth to California, and so a railroad would be the logical way to do that. And so in 1853, the United States offers to Mexico $10 million in order to buy what is today the southern part of Arizona and New Mexico. The city of Tucson, Arizona is now within what becomes known as the Gadsden Purchase. Now, the person who really pushed for this within the United States government was Secretary of War at the time, Jefferson Davis. Keep that name in mind because he's going to come back later. But after the United States actually pays for and purchases this area in southern Arizona, the Northerners, who are now outraged at the South and don't want to add any more slave territory and don't want to help the South at all, they stop any plans that were in the works for building a transcontinental railroad, and that railroad will not actually be built until after the Civil War is over. So it's going to take them more than 10 years to actually get the railroad built, and that's even after they paid for this territory. And when the railroad is actually built, it's actually a more northern railroad that will go through northern Utah rather than southern Arizona. And it was just kind of another way that the North was very angry at the South for trying to take over all this territory and expand slavery. And so we talked about the election of 1852, we talked about Franklin Pierce, and we talked a little bit about the Gadsden Purchase, and so hopefully that will help you well during this lesson.